Get out! Rachel Thompson's palm slammed the withdrawal slip across the counter. Her blue eyes burned with disgust as she looked Nicole Bennett up and down like she was examining garbage. This bank isn't for people like you. Nicole's grip tightened on her arm's briefcase. The marble lobby went dead silent. Other customers turned, phones rising. People like me. Nicole's voice stayed deadly calm. Rachel smirked, leaning back in her chair. Poor people. Ghetto people. Whatever you want to call it. She waved her hand dismissively. Try the check-cashing place down the street. The slap of institutional racism echoed through the pristine lobby. Crystal chandeliers cast harsh shadows on the standoff. Young white teller versus black woman in a designer suit. Nicole stepped closer to the bulletproof glass. I see. What Rachel didn't know was that the woman she had just humiliated owned the building she was sitting in. Have you ever watched someone destroy their life right before your eyes? Nicole Bennett had started her day reviewing quarterly reports in her penthouse apartment. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Financial documents scattered across her marble dining table told the story of a business empire most people couldn't imagine. Hotels, real estate, technology investments, and yes, banking institutions. Her driver had offered to wait outside Liberty Trust Bank, but Nicole preferred walking the final 2 blocks. She enjoyed observing the neighborhood she had helped transform from abandoned warehouses into a gleaming financial district. Every building, every street corner held memories of deals she had orchestrated, investments that had paid off beyond anyone's expectations. Liberty Trust Bank occupied the corner of Fifth Avenue and Madison Avenue like a fortress of old money. Marble columns, brass fixtures, oil paintings of long-dead white men in expensive suits. This wasn't some neighborhood branch. This was where serious money came to play. Private wealth management, exclusive services, the kind of place that screened clients before they even walked through the doors. Rachel Thompson had arrived early as always. Blonde hair pulled into a perfect bun, navy blazer pressed to military standards. She took pride in maintaining what she called professional standards. Her supervisor had praised her attention to detail, her ability to spot inappropriate customers before they wasted everyone's time. The daily rush brought the usual parade of suits and briefcases, lawyers heading to court, executives between meetings, trust fund children accessing their allowances. Rachel processed each transaction with mechanical efficiency, barely looking up from her computer screen. When Nicole entered the lobby, she paused at the customer service desk. The agent, an older black woman named Mrs. Patterson, smiled with genuine warmth. "Good morning, Miss Bennett. How can we help you today?" Nicole returned the smile. "Just a quick withdrawal, Patricia. Nothing complicated." But instead of heading to the VIP banking suite upstairs, Nicole walked toward the general teller windows. She wanted to experience what regular customers faced, especially customers who looked like her. Rachel's expression shifted the moment Nicole approached her station. Her professional smile faltered, replaced by something colder. Years of training had taught her to assess customers quickly, their clothes, their confidence, their apparent net worth. What she saw was a black woman, regardless of the expensive suit, requesting something that felt above her station. "Good morning," Nicole said pleasantly, sliding a withdrawal slip across the marble counter. "I'd like to withdraw $15,000 in cash, please." Rachel's eyebrows shot up. $15,000 was unusual, but not impossible for private banking clients. Still, something about this woman's request felt wrong to her. Too bold, too comfortable, like she belonged somewhere she clearly didn't. "That's quite a large amount," Rachel replied, her tone shifting subtly. "Do you have your account information with you?" Nicole produced her identification and account card without hesitation. Everything appeared legitimate. The cards were real, the signatures matched, the account numbers checked out in the system. But Rachel's training had taught her to look beyond documentation. Sometimes people obtain these things through questionable means. "I'll need to verify a few additional details," Rachel said, reaching for her phone. Standard procedure for large cash withdrawals. What Rachel didn't realize was that she wasn't calling account verification, she was calling security. Her instincts told her something wasn't right about this transaction, and years of working in an exclusive bank had taught her to trust those instincts. Better safe than sorry, especially when dealing with people who didn't fit the usual client profile. Other customers had begun to notice the delay. A businessman checked his watch impatiently. An elderly woman whispered to her companion. The bank's efficiency was grinding to a halt over one black woman's request for her own money. Nicole remained calm, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She recognized the game being played, the subtle stalling, the unnecessary verification, the growing assumption that she didn't belong. It was a dance she had seen performed countless times, just never directed at someone with her particular resources. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose every assumption, every prejudice, every false belief about power and respectability that walked through those marble doors each day. Two security guards materialized from the shadows near the customer service area, their movements casual but deliberate. They positioned themselves within earshot of Rachel's teller window, close enough to intervene if needed. Nicole noticed immediately, but kept her expression neutral, recognizing the tactical positioning from countless corporate security briefings she had attended from the other side. Rachel hung up her phone and returned to the counter with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her confidence had grown during the brief conversation with security, reinforced by the knowledge that backup was now in place. "Ma'am, I've spoken with our security department. We're going to need some additional verification before processing this withdrawal." "What kind of verification?" Nicole's voice remained steady, professional, though her grip on her briefcase handle tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, $15,000 is a substantial amount. We need to ensure the funds are legitimately yours." Rachel's words carried an unmistakable implication that settled over the lobby like a dark cloud, transforming the pristine banking environment into something resembling an interrogation room. A businessman in line behind Nicole shifted uncomfortably, checking his watch with obvious irritation. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter, her eyes darting between Nicole and the security guards. The routine banking had transformed into something resembling a criminal investigation, with Nicole cast as the prime suspect in her own financial transaction. "I've provided my identification and account card," Nicole replied, her tone carefully measured. "What additional verification do you require?" Rachel consulted her computer screen, scrolling through what appeared to be account details, but was actually a stalling tactic while she waited for management support. Her supervisor, Stephen Caldwell, was already heading down from the second floor, alerted by the security call that had described a suspicious customer attempting a large cash withdrawal. "Sometimes people obtain account information through questionable means," Rachel said, her voice growing bolder as she sensed support approaching. "We've had incidents recently where individuals have attempted to access accounts that don't belong to them. You understand our position." The words hung in the air like an accusation wrapped in corporate speak. Other customers openly stared now, some pulling out phones to record what looked like a confrontation brewing between institutional authority and an increasingly isolated black woman. Nicole's expensive suit and composed demeanor meant nothing to Rachel, who saw only what her prejudices allowed her to see. "Are you suggesting I obtained this account information illegally?" Nicole asked, her voice gaining a sharper edge that made Rachel's confidence waver momentarily. "I'm not suggesting anything," Rachel replied quickly, glancing toward the elevator bank where she expected Caldwell to appear. "I'm following standard bank procedures for high-risk transactions." "High risk based on what criteria?" Nicole pressed. Rachel's mouth opened and closed, searching for an answer that wouldn't expose her true reasoning. The pause stretched uncomfortably as she realized she had backed herself into a corner with no professional justification for her actions. Stephen Caldwell emerged from the elevator looking harried and slightly out of breath. His conservative suit wrinkled from his hasty descent. He had built his career on following protocols and avoiding problems, especially problems that might reflect poorly on the bank's exclusive reputation among its wealthy clientele. "Miss Thompson, what seems to be the issue here?" Caldwell asked, though his eyes remained fixed on Nicole with obvious suspicion, taking in her appearance and automatically categorizing her as a potential threat to the bank's orderly operations. "This customer is requesting a large cash withdrawal," Rachel explained, emphasizing the word customer with barely concealed skepticism. "I'm following standard verification procedures for suspicious transactions." Caldwell nodded approvingly, his middle management instincts kicking in. "Of course. Excellent work, Rachel." "Ma'am," he turned to Nicole, "I'm Stephen Caldwell, Assistant Branch Manager. I understand you're requesting a substantial cash withdrawal. We need to follow certain protocols to protect our customers and the institution." Nicole's patience was wearing thin, but her voice remained controlled. "Mr. Caldwell, I've provided all required identification." Is there a specific issue with my account that prevents you from processing this withdrawal? It's nothing personal, you understand, Caldwell replied, his tone patronizing in a way that suggested he dealt with difficult customers regularly. We've had some incidents recently, people trying to access accounts that don't belong to them. I'm sure you can appreciate our need for caution in these matters. The coded language wasn't lost on anyone present. Incidents and caution became euphemisms for the racial profiling happening in real time, wrapped in the sanitized vocabulary of corporate discrimination. Nicole felt the familiar burn of prejudice disguised as policy. What kind of incident specifically? Nicole asked, her voice gaining an edge that made Rachel step back slightly from the counter. Caldwell cleared his throat uncomfortably, realizing he was venturing into potentially dangerous territory. Various forms of fraud, identity theft, people attempting to access accounts using stolen information. You understand? We have a responsibility to our legitimate customers. The lobby had become a theater with other customers serving as an unwilling audience to institutional racism on full display. Some looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, shifting nervously and avoiding eye contact. Others nodded approvingly, their own prejudices validating the bank's actions as necessary security measures. Are you suggesting I'm attempting to commit fraud, Mr. Caldwell? Nicole's question cut through the tension like a blade, forcing everyone present to confront the accusation being made without directly being stated. Not at all. Not at all. Caldwell backpedaled quickly, raising his hands in a gesture meant to appear reasonable. We're simply following established procedures. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable scheduling an appointment with one of our private bankers upstairs. Much more appropriate for transactions of this nature, more discreet, you understand? Rachel sensed victory and pressed her advantage, emboldened by Caldwell's support. Ma'am, we have to verify that these funds are legitimately yours. Federal banking regulations require extensive documentation for large cash withdrawals, especially when customers aren't familiar with our standard procedures. And you've determined I'm unfamiliar with banking procedures based on what exactly? Nicole's voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of controlled calm that preceded either complete surrender or total warfare. Rachel's confidence peaked as she delivered what she believed would be the killing blow. Ma'am, this is a private banking institution. We serve established clients with substantial assets. Our procedures might be different from what you're used to at other establishments. The insult was expertly crafted, technically professional, while carrying maximum impact. Rachel had essentially called Nicole ignorant of proper banking while suggesting she belonged at lesser institutions that served people of her perceived social class. Nicole placed both hands on the marble counter, her composure finally cracking slightly. The sound of her palms against the stone echoed through the lobby like a gavel calling for order. I see. And what establishments do you imagine I'm used to, Miss Thompson? Rachel glanced at Caldwell for support before continuing. Well, neighborhood banks, check cashing services, places that don't require the same level of documentation we maintain here. The racist implications hung in the air like toxic gas, poisoning the atmosphere of the entire lobby. Other customers had stopped pretending not to listen, openly staring at the confrontation that had escalated far beyond a simple banking dispute. Caldwell stepped forward, sensing the situation spiraling beyond his control, but unwilling to back down from what he saw as a necessary defense of the bank's standards. Ladies, let's all take a step back here. Ma'am, if you're unsatisfied with our service policies, perhaps another institution might better meet your particular needs. The dismissal was final, absolute. They were essentially telling Nicole to leave, to take her business elsewhere, to accept that she didn't belong in their world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The message was clear. People like her should know their place, but Nicole Bennett had reached her breaking point. Instead of leaving in humiliation as they expected, she pulled out her cell phone with deliberate slowness. I think there's someone you both need to speak with. Rachel actually laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the marble walls. Ma'am, calling your attorney won't change our policies. We have the right to refuse service to anyone we deem a security risk. Nicole's fingers moved across her phone with practiced efficiency, the muscle memory of someone who made important calls daily. When she looked up, her smile was arctic cold, the expression of someone who had just decided to end careers rather than continue arguing. I'm not calling my attorney, Miss Thompson. I'm calling the president of this bank. The color drained from Rachel's face as the implications hit her. Caldwell stepped closer, his own confidence wavering as he watched Nicole lift the phone to her ear with the casual familiarity of someone who made such calls regularly. The lobby fell silent except for the soft classical music playing from hidden speakers. Every customer, every employee, every security guard watched and waited, sensing that whatever happened next would change everything. Thomas. Nicole's voice was calm, professional, but with an undertone that promised consequences. It's Nicole. I'm in your lobby having an interesting conversation with your staff about whether I'm qualified to access my own money. The world stopped spinning. Diana's side of the conversation was measured, professional, devastating in its simplicity. Yes, Thomas, I'm still here. Your Miss Thompson and Mr. Caldwell have some interesting theories about fraud prevention. I think you should come down and hear them yourself. When she ended the call, the silence in the lobby was absolute. Even the classical music seemed to fade into background noise as every person present processed what they had just witnessed. Rachel's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her teller window, the full weight of potential catastrophe beginning to settle on her shoulders. Caldwell stepped closer to Nicole, his voice dropping to what he hoped was a conciliatory whisper. Ma'am, perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. If you actually know Mr. Reynolds personally, we can certainly expedite your transaction. Nicole's expression didn't change. Mr. Caldwell, moments ago you were questioning my right to be in this building. What's changed? The question hung in the air like a sword, waiting to fall. Caldwell's face flushed red as he realized his words had trapped him in an admission of discriminatory treatment. Around them, customers shifted uncomfortably, some edging toward the exits as they sensed an institutional meltdown approaching. Rachel abandoned her teller window and rushed to Caldwell's side, her professional composure completely shattered. Sir, I was just following protocols, standard verification procedures for large withdrawals. I never suggested anything inappropriate, but her whispered damage control came too late. Other customers had recorded significant portions of the interaction, their phones capturing every discriminatory word, every condescending gesture, every moment of institutional racism on full display. Mrs. Patterson from the customer service desk approached cautiously, her face grave with understanding. She had worked at Liberty Trust Bank for years and recognized the severity of what had just unfolded. Miss Thompson? Mr. Caldwell, perhaps you should review Miss Bennett's account details more carefully. Rachel returned to her computer terminal with shaking fingers, finally accessing the account information she should have examined thoroughly from the beginning. Her face went white as she read the screen, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly as the numbers registered in her consciousness. The account balance showed figures that exceeded the annual operating budget of smaller banks, private banking, platinum services, VYP status indicators that she had somehow missed or ignored in her rush to judgment. But even more damning were the account notes that identified the holder's corporate affiliations and board positions. "Oh my God," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible above the lobby's tension. Caldwell leaned over to read the screen, his own face draining of color as he processed the information. Years of banking experience had taught him to recognize serious money when he saw it, and what he was looking at represented the kind of wealth that built institutions like Liberty Trust Bank rather than simply using their services. The elevator chimed, softly, announcing an arrival that made everyone in the lobby freeze. Footsteps echoed across the marble floor with the urgency of someone who had dropped everything to respond to a crisis. The sound grew closer, accompanied by hushed voices of what sounded like multiple people moving quickly. Nicole remained perfectly still at the teller window, her briefcase still in hand, her expression composed despite the chaos erupting around her. She had made similar calls before, though never as a customer experiencing discrimination in her own institution. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years implementing diversity policies and cultural sensitivity training, only to discover how easily those measures could be ignored when real prejudice took control. Other bank employees began emerging from back offices, drawn by the unusual commotion in the normally serene lobby. Tellers from other windows watched nervously as their colleague faced what looked like the end of her career. Customer service representatives whispered among themselves, recognizing the signs of an institutional crisis that would ripple through every level of the organization. The security guards maintained their positions, but looked increasingly uncomfortable as they realized they had been called to intimidate someone who apparently warranted the bank president's immediate personal attention. Their training had taught them to respond to threats, but nothing had prepared them for the possibility that the perceived threat might actually be the person signing their paychecks. Social media notifications began pinging on various phones throughout the lobby as recordings of the confrontation started circulating online. The hashtag Liberty Trust was already gaining traction with early posts describing racist bank tellers and discrimination at upscale financial institutions. The bank's carefully cultivated reputation for discretion and professionalism was hemorrhaging in real time. Caldwell made one last desperate attempt at damage control, approaching Nicole with the kind of obsequious smile reserved for very important customers. "Miss Bennett, I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding quickly. Perhaps we could continue this conversation in my office away from the lobby." Nicole's response was quietly devastating. "Mr. Caldwell, do you believe this misunderstanding, as you call it, would have occurred if I were white?" The question landed like a physical blow, forcing Caldwell to confront the reality of what had happened, rather than hiding behind corporate euphemisms. His silence provided the answer everyone in the lobby already knew. The elevator chimed again. Thomas Reynolds burst through the elevator doors like a man fleeing a burning building. Silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, he moved across the marble lobby with the desperate urgency of someone whose career was hanging by a thread. But his destination wasn't Rachel's teller window or Caldwell's nervous hovering. He walked directly to Nicole Bennett, his face a mask of professional horror mixed with personal mortification. The entire lobby watched in stunned silence as the bank president approached the woman his staff had just humiliated. "Nicole." Reynolds' voice carried the weight of someone trying to prevent a disaster that had already occurred. "I am profoundly sorry. What in God's name happened here?" The words hit the lobby like a shockwave. Rachel gripped her teller counter so hard her knuckles went white. Caldwell's mouth fell open as he processed the impossible. His bank president was personally apologizing to the woman they had just attempted to remove from the building. Nicole's response was measured, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to corporate crisis management. "Thomas, your staff seems to believe I'm not qualified for basic banking services. They've suggested I take my business to check cashing establishments more suited to people like me." Reynolds' face darkened as he turned toward Rachel and Caldwell, his expression promising consequences that would echo through their professional lives. "Is this true? Did you actually say that to Miss Bennett?" Rachel stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "Sir, I was following standard procedures for large cash withdrawals. I never meant to suggest anything inappropriate." "Standard procedures?" Reynolds' voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of every person in the lobby. "What standard procedures require you to question a customer's legitimacy based on their appearance?" The question hung in the air like an executioner's axe. Other customers leaned forward, sensing the approaching revelation that would explain the bank president's obvious panic. Some continued recording, recognizing they were witnessing something unprecedented in the sterile world of corporate banking. Reynolds' assistant emerged from the elevator carrying a leather portfolio, her face grim with the understanding of what was about to unfold. She approached quickly, handing Reynolds documents that would transform this confrontation from embarrassing customer service failure into institutional catastrophe. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reynolds addressed the entire lobby, his voice carrying the formal tone of someone making an announcement that would be remembered and repeated. "I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about who Miss Nicole Bennett is." The lobby fell silent, except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Even the security guards moved closer, drawn by the gravity in Reynolds' voice. "Miss Bennett is the Chief Executive Officer of Bennett Financial Group," Reynolds continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. "Bennett Financial Group is the majority shareholder of Liberty Trust Bank." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's face went beyond white to a sickly gray as the implications crashed over her. The woman she had dismissed, insulted, and attempted to remove from the building wasn't just a customer. She was the owner. Furthermore, Reynolds continued, his voice gaining strength as he fully committed to revealing the scope of the disaster. "Miss Bennett serves as chairman of our board of directors. She doesn't just bank here, she owns this institution." Caldwell stumbled backward, as if physically struck. His career in banking had taught him to recognize power structures, but his prejudices had blinded him to the reality standing directly in front of him. The woman he had condescended to and dismissed literally signed his paychecks. Nicole's voice cut through the stunned silence with surgical precision. "I came here today as a customer to see how our frontline staff treats people who look like me. Your employees have provided a very clear answer to that question." The revelation rippled through the lobby like an earthquake. Other customers began whispering, some laughing at the absurdity of the situation, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The recordings on their phones had just captured what might be the most spectacular case of racist assumptions backfiring in corporate history. Rachel finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Miss Bennett, if we had known who you were," Nicole's response was swift and devastating. "That's exactly the problem, Miss Thompson. Your treatment of customers shouldn't depend on who they know or what they own. Every person who walks through these doors deserves dignity and respect." The teaching moment landed with the force of absolute moral authority. Reynolds nodded grimly, recognizing that his institution's failures ran deeper than simple policy violations. This was about culture, assumptions, and the kind of systemic prejudice that destroyed both individual lives and corporate reputations. "Miss Bennett," Caldwell attempted desperately. "If we had realized your position, Mr. "Caldwell," Nicole interrupted, her voice carrying decades of experience dealing with institutional discrimination. "You've just admitted that your professional courtesy depends on perceived status rather than basic human decency." The lobby had become a classroom, with Nicole delivering a master course in corporate accountability to an audience that included employees, customers, and the growing online community watching through various live streams. The bank's carefully maintained image of discretion and professionalism was dissolving in real time. Reynolds addressed his staff with the grim authority of someone preparing to implement immediate consequences. "This isn't just about customer service failures, this is about the fundamental values our institution claims to represent." One of the customers, an elderly businessman who had been recording the entire interaction, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I want you to know that what I witnessed here was disgraceful. Your employee's behavior was completely unacceptable." His words triggered a cascade of similar statements from other witnesses. Each person added their voice to what was becoming a public reckoning with institutional racism. The lobby transformed from a place of quiet financial transactions into a forum for moral accountability. Nicole surveyed the scene with the composure of someone who had faced similar battles throughout her career, though never with such dramatic stakes. "This situation will serve as a case study for every employee in our organization. We will examine how our culture allowed this to happen and ensure it never happens again." The portraits of distinguished white men that lined the lobby walls seemed to watch the proceedings with silent judgment. Among them, largely unnoticed until now, hung a professional photograph of Nicole Bennett herself, identified as board chairman. The irony was complete. Rachel and Caldwell had discriminated against someone whose picture was literally watching them from the wall. Reynolds's phone buzzed constantly as news of the incident began spreading through banking industry networks. The story was already being shared across social media platforms, with early posts describing it as the most spectacular case of racist assumptions meeting corporate reality in recent memory. The revolution had begun with a simple withdrawal request. It would end with fundamental changes to how the entire banking industry approached diversity, respect, and human dignity. Soon after Nicole's revelation, the executive conference room on the third floor had been transformed into a crisis command center. Reynolds sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his face grave as he reviewed security footage that captured every damning moment of the lobby confrontation. Nicole occupied the chair to his right, her expression composed but unforgiving as she watched her own humiliation play out in high definition. "Roll it back to the beginning," Nicole instructed, her voice clinical in its detachment. "I want to see exactly when Miss Thompson decided I was unworthy of basic courtesy." The footage revealed the full scope of the discrimination with brutal clarity. Frame by frame, the security cameras had captured Rachel's initial dismissive glance, her condescending body language, her deliberate stalling tactics. Most damning was the moment when she had called security, her mouth clearly forming the words, "suspicious customer," while pointing directly at Nicole. Amanda Walsh, the bank's human resources director, had arrived within minutes of being summoned. her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from her rushed journey. She had brought Nicole's complete personnel file, Rachel's employment records, and Caldwell's performance reviews, documents that would soon become evidence in what promised to be a comprehensive investigation. "This is a catastrophe," Walsh muttered, reviewing Rachel's training completion records. "Look at this. She completed our diversity and inclusion training recently, passed with flying colors, even received commendations for her professional demeanor." Nicole's laugh was bitter. Training means nothing if the underlying attitudes remain unchanged. Ms. Thompson didn't suddenly become racist this morning. She simply revealed beliefs she had been harboring all along. The social media monitoring team had set up laptops around the conference table, tracking the viral spread of the incident across multiple platforms. The hashtag #LibertyTrust was trending nationally, with video clips of the confrontation racking up millions of views. The comments ranged from outraged support for Nicole to heated debates about discrimination in corporate America. "We're getting calls from news outlets," reported Derek Brooks, the bank's communications director. "CNN, MSNBC, Fox Business. They all want statements about the incident. The Washington Post is already working on a feature story about racism in elite banking." Reynolds rubbed his temples, recognizing that damage control was becoming impossible. "What's our legal exposure here?" The bank's general counsel, Victoria Garcia, consulted her notes with the grim efficiency of someone calculating potential disasters. "Discrimination lawsuits are almost certain. Federal civil rights violations are possible. If the Justice Department decides to investigate our lending practices, we could be looking at consent decrees, federal oversight, massive fines." But Nicole raised her hand, stopping the legal speculation. "This isn't about lawsuits or settlements. This is about institutional change. I want to know how our culture allowed this to happen and what we're going to do to prevent it from ever happening again." The investigation began immediately. Employee interviews were conducted throughout the day, revealing a pattern of subtle discrimination that had been tolerated or ignored for years. Teller supervisor Rosa Santos broke down during her interview, admitting she had witnessed Rachel make similar comments about other minority customers, but hadn't reported them. "She always said she was just being careful," Santos explained through tears, "protecting the bank from fraud. I thought maybe she was being overly cautious, but I never imagined it was because of race." Other employees came forward with disturbing testimonies. Robert Chang, a security guard, admitted he had been instructed to keep an eye on certain customers who didn't fit the bank's traditional clientele. Lisa Torres, a customer service representative, described being coached to redirect minority customers to online banking rather than in-person services. Customer complaints from over the years were reviewed with new scrutiny. A disturbing pattern emerged of minority customers experiencing unusual delays, additional verification requirements, and suggestions to use other banking institutions. Complaints that had been dismissed as isolated incidents now revealed systemic discrimination. Dr. Eric Washington, a prominent surgeon, had complained earlier about being questioned extensively while attempting to deposit a six-figure insurance settlement check. His complaint had been dismissed as a misunderstanding. Now it read like a preview of Nicole's experience. Attorney Denise Moore had filed a formal complaint about being asked to provide 3 forms of identification for a routine wire transfer, while white customers with smaller transactions sailed through with minimal verification. Her complaint was buried in bureaucratic responses about enhanced security protocols. The evidence painted a picture of institutional racism disguised as prudent banking policies. Rachel Thompson wasn't a rogue employee. She was the logical product of a culture that had systematically devalued minority customers while maintaining plausible deniability. Caldwell's interview was particularly devastating. Under direct questioning, he admitted to supporting Rachel's actions because he had assumed Nicole didn't fit the profile of a typical Liberty Trust Bank customer. His definition of appropriate clients revealed deeply ingrained biases about race, class, and worthiness that permeated his management philosophy. "I've been in banking for years," Caldwell said defensively. "You develop instincts about people. You can usually tell who belongs and who doesn't." "Based on what criteria?" Nicole asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Caldwell's attempted explanation revealed the depth of his prejudiced assumptions. "Well, you know, the way they dress, how they speak, whether they understand our procedures. Banking is about trust and reputation, and you determined I was untrustworthy because of my race," Nicole pressed. No, that's not what I meant," Caldwell backpedaled frantically. "It's about patterns, statistics, risk assessment." Nicole's response was devastating. "Mr. Caldwell, you've just described racial profiling with corporate vocabulary. The result is identical whether you call it risk assessment or racism." The security footage review expanded beyond the incident to include interactions from previous weeks. Pattern recognition software identified numerous instances where minority customers had received different treatment than white customers making similar requests. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Camera angles captured subtle but consistent discriminatory behaviors, longer wait times for minority customers, more extensive questioning, suggestions to use alternative services. The technology revealed what human oversight had missed or ignored. Rachel's interview was scheduled for the afternoon, giving her time to fully comprehend the magnitude of her situation. When she finally entered the conference room, her earlier arrogance had been replaced by desperate panic. Her union representative sat beside her, both of them understanding that they were fighting a losing battle. "Ms. Thompson," Nicole began, "I'd like you to explain your decision-making process today. Walk us through your reasoning for questioning my legitimacy." Rachel's response revealed the depth of her prejudiced assumptions. "I was protecting the bank from potential fraud. Large cash withdrawals from customers who don't fit our typical demographics are red flags for money laundering or identity theft. And what demographic do I fit in your opinion?" Nicole's question was razor sharp. Rachel's stammered response exposed years of racial profiling disguised as professional judgment. "Well, people from certain neighborhoods, customers who might not be familiar with proper banking procedures." "Which neighborhoods would those be?" Nicole pressed relentlessly. The questioning continued for a while, with Rachel's explanations becoming increasingly desperate and contradictory. She claimed her actions were based on training, but couldn't identify specific policies that supported her behavior. She insisted she wasn't racist, but couldn't explain why her security concerns consistently targeted minority customers. The review of training materials revealed massive gaps in the bank's diversity education. Role-playing scenarios focused on obvious discrimination while ignoring subtle biases that shaped daily interactions. Cultural sensitivity training was treated as a compliance requirement, rather than genuine education about unconscious prejudice. The training videos from years earlier showed smiling actors discussing the importance of treating all customers with respect, but provided no guidance for recognizing implicit bias or challenging discriminatory assumptions. The content was superficial, designed to meet legal requirements rather than create meaningful change. Local civil rights leaders were contacted for input on institutional changes. Dr. Rachel Thompson from the NAACP reviewed the investigation findings and provided recommendations for comprehensive reform. "This isn't just about firing individuals," she explained. "You need to examine every policy, every procedure, every assumption that allows this culture to flourish." Reverend Tyrone Williams from the Urban League offered to conduct workshops on unconscious bias for all bank employees. "True change requires more than sensitivity training," he explained. "People need to understand how their assumptions affect their actions, even when they believe they're being fair." The bank's board of directors convened an emergency meeting that evening. Nicole presented the investigation findings with the clinical precision of someone dissecting institutional failure. Board members who had served for decades were forced to confront their own blind spots about diversity and inclusion. Board member Elizabeth Harper, who had served for years, admitted she had never questioned why the bank's customer demographics skewed so heavily white despite serving a diverse metropolitan area. "We assumed our services naturally attracted certain types of clients. We never examined whether our culture was actively excluding others." By the end of the meeting, the decisions were final. Rachel Thompson was terminated immediately for violating customer service standards and engaging in discriminatory behavior. Her racist comments were deemed incompatible with the bank's stated values and legal obligations. Her final paycheck would include severance as required by law, but her employment reference would reflect the circumstances of her dismissal. Caldwell faced a more complex judgment. His failure to intervene and his support of discriminatory actions warranted serious consequences, but his long career and apparent willingness to learn suggested possibility for redemption. He was demoted to a non-supervisory role and required to complete extensive bias training before any consideration for future advancement. The systemic changes announced that evening were comprehensive and immediate. All customer-facing employees would undergo updated diversity training designed by external experts. New verification procedures would focus on documentation rather than subjective judgment. Anonymous reporting systems would allow employees to report discriminatory behavior without fear of retaliation. Monthly diversity audits would review customer interactions for patterns of differential treatment. Customer satisfaction surveys would include specific questions about respectful treatment and perceived bias. The bank committed to publishing quarterly reports on diversity metrics and progress toward inclusion goals. Reynolds addressed the entire bank staff via video conference, his message clear and uncompromising. What happened today represents a fundamental failure of our institutional values. We will examine every policy, every procedure, every assumption that contributed to this incident. Change begins now. Sometime later, Nicole Bennett walked through the same glass doors of Liberty Trust Bank. The lobby looked identical, but everything had changed. New faces staffed the teller windows, diverse employees reflecting the city they served. Nicole approached the same counter where Rachel Thompson had once worked. The nameplate now read, Tyler Johnson. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" "I'd like to withdraw $5,000 in cash, please," Nicole said, presenting her identification. Tyler processed the request seamlessly, asking standard verification questions without suspicion or condescension. The transaction completed smoothly. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Nicole smiled. "No, thank you. You've been excellent." Rachel Thompson's fate had become a cautionary tale throughout banking. Unable to find employment at any major financial institution, she had been forced to leave the city. Her discriminatory behavior, captured on viral video, had made her unemployable in banking. The irony was complete. The woman who had suggested Nicole use check cashing services was now working at one herself in a small town where her reputation hadn't preceded her. Stephen Caldwell's journey took a different path. His demotion had been painful but transformative. Stripped of supervisory authority and required to complete intensive bias training, he had undergone genuine awakening about his prejudices. Now working as a loan processor, Caldwell had become an effective advocate for inclusive practices. His presentations to new employees carried the weight of lived regret. "I spent years thinking I was being professional," Caldwell would tell training classes. "What I was actually doing was perpetuating exclusion based on assumptions I didn't realize I was making." The transformation at Liberty Trust Bank attracted national attention. Harvard Business School added the incident to their curriculum as a case study in institutional racism and corporate accountability. The bank's response had become a model for other organizations. Customer satisfaction scores improved dramatically across all demographics. The bank's inclusive environment attracted new clients from previously underserved communities. The incident that had threatened to destroy their reputation had ultimately strengthened their market position. Federal regulators completed their investigation without imposing fines, citing the bank's proactive response and comprehensive reforms. The Department of Justice praised Liberty Trust Bank's transparency and commitment to change. Nicole's focus on systemic change rather than individual punishment proved effective. Reforms at Liberty Trust Bank influenced policy changes at banks nationwide, creating ripple effects extending far beyond one discriminatory incident. The anonymous reporting system generated dozens of complaints about subtle discrimination that might otherwise have gone unaddressed. Monthly diversity audits revealed and corrected unconscious biases in lending practices and customer service protocols. As Nicole left the bank, she reflected on the journey from humiliation to transformation. The woman told she didn't belong had fundamentally changed the institution that rejected her, creating a legacy benefiting countless future customers. The security cameras that once captured discrimination now recorded respectful interactions between diverse staff and customers from every background. The marble lobby that witnessed institutional racism had become a symbol of redemption. Change was possible when leaders chose accountability over denial, when institutions embraced uncomfortable truths rather than defensive reactions. Nicole's experience proved that entrenched prejudices could be challenged and overcome through sustained commitment to justice. The revolution, sparked by a simple withdrawal request, had evolved into something more significant, a blueprint for institutional transformation that would influence corporate culture for generations. Nicole Bennett's story reminds us that discrimination often hides behind policies and professional smiles, but it also proves that institutions can change when held accountable by the right people at the right moment. The woman who walked into Liberty Trust Bank that day wasn't seeking confrontation. She was conducting a simple test of her own institution's values. What she discovered was a culture of assumptions that had operated unchallenged for years, protected by the very authority structure she happened to control. Rachel Thompson's downfall wasn't just about one racist comment. It was about a system that had taught her to see certain people as unworthy of basic respect. Her assumptions cost her everything because she made them about someone with the power to demand accountability. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's about the possibility of genuine change. When leaders choose transformation over damage control, Nicole could have quietly fired the offending employees and moved on. Instead, she chose to examine every assumption, every policy, every cultural norm that had enabled discrimination to flourish. The ripple effects continue today. Banking institutions across the country have updated their training programs, implemented bias audits, and created reporting systems for discriminatory behavior. Federal regulators now require annual diversity assessments. Industry conferences feature panels on inclusive customer service. Most importantly, thousands of customers who might have faced similar discrimination now receive the respect they deserve. The marble lobbies and crystal chandeliers remain, but the barriers to dignity have been systematically dismantled. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it's never perfect. But Nicole's experience proves that progress is possible when people refuse to accept that's just how things are as an answer. Every person who walks through those banks now benefits from one woman's decision to demand better. The next time you witness discrimination, whether subtle or obvious, remember that silence is complicity. Whether you own the building or simply stand in the lobby, you have the power to speak up, to demand accountability, to insist that respect isn't earned by status, but owed by humanity. Have you ever made assumptions about someone that turned out to be completely wrong? Have you ever stayed silent when you witnessed unfair treatment? What would you have done in Nicole's situation, in the other customers' positions? Share this story with someone who needs to understand that dignity isn't negotiable. If stories of justice and accountability matter to you, subscribe for more content showing how individuals can create institutional change. Tell us in the comments about times you've witnessed discrimination and how it was addressed. Your voice matters in creating the change we need to see. Remember, you don't need to own the bank to demand respect. You just need to own your dignity and refuse to let anyone take it from you. Never underestimate the quiet power of dignity when the world tries to strip it away. In that grand marble lobby, Nicole Bennett stood facing cold stares and cruel assumptions, her designer suit and calm voice dismissed as if they meant nothing. Yet beneath the humiliation burned a deeper truth. No amount of prejudice can erase who you truly are, and sometimes the very system that rejects you is the one you have the power to transform. What began as a moment of heartbreaking injustice became a powerful reminder that real change doesn't start with revenge. It starts with courage. Courage to speak up, to demand respect not because of your status, but simply because you are human. Nicole could have walked away in silence or used her power to crush those who wronged her. Instead, she chose something far more lasting. She chose to shine a light on the hidden biases that poison institutions and hearts alike, turning pain into purpose and humiliation into hope for thousands who would come after her. Her story whispers to every one of us. The next time someone tries to make you feel small, remember that your worth isn't defined by their ignorance. Stand tall, speak truth, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong. Because dignity isn't something you earn, it's something you carry, and when you refuse to surrender it, you don't just change your own story. You rewrite the rules for everyone around you. If Nicole's journey touched something deep inside you, drop a comment below. Have you ever faced unfair judgment or witnessed someone else being treated this way? What would you have done in her place? Share your thoughts. We grow stronger when we share our truths. And if stories like this inspire you to believe in justice, accountability, and real transformation, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Let's keep lifting each other up, one powerful story at a time. Your voice matters here.